An entire civilization can disappear in a single day. We are exploring 25 ancient catastrophes that erased entire civilizations overnight, revealing the shocking forces that can end a world by sunrise. You will uncover the hidden patterns that link these dramatic collapses, from a volcanic eruption that silenced a vibrant island culture to a drought that emptied a mighty desert capital. What mysterious event could have prompted a society to burn its own cities to the ground? By the end, you will see the fragile threads that hold our own world together in a startling new light. What do you believe is the greatest threat to our way of life? The island of Thura was a jewel of the ancient world. Its vibrant Minoan culture, centered on the nearby island of Crete, had built stunning multi-story palaces with advanced plumbing and vibrant frescoes depicting leaping dolphins and graceful athletes. Their merchant ships dominated the Mediterranean, creating a vast network of trade and wealth. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Around the year 1600 BCE, the very ground beneath Thura tore itself to pieces in one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions humanity has ever witnessed. The explosion was so immense it is estimated to have been 4 times more powerful than the famous Krakatoa event. The heart of the island collapsed into a seething magma chamber, creating the vast caldera we now see as the beautiful crescent of Santorini. But the beauty we see today was born from utter devastation. The initial blast would have been heard across continents, a roar announcing the end of a world. Then came the waves, colossal tsunamis, some towering over 100 feet high, radiated out from the shattered island, racing across the sea to smash into the northern coast of Crete. These walls of water obliterated the Minoan fleet, the very source of their economic power, and scoured coastal cities and ports from the map. The destruction did not stop at the shoreline. The sky itself turned against them. A thick plume of volcanic ash and pumice blotted out the sun, falling like gray snow for days and burying settlements on Thura under dozens of feet of debris. This ash cloud drifted east, blanketing vast areas of the Aegean and Anatolia, rendering farmland infertile for a generation. The volcanic winter that followed would have triggered widespread crop failures and famine, crippling the society from within. Archaeological evidence, painstakingly analyzed by experts like geologist Floyd McCoy, shows a sharp and sudden decline. The magnificent palace at Knossos on Crete was never again the thriving hub it once was. This real-world cataclysm was so profound that many scholars believe it seeded one of our greatest legends, the story of the lost continent of Atlantis. A sophisticated island kingdom suddenly swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. The parallels are haunting. The Minoan collapse serves as our first, and perhaps most literal, example of a civilization erased overnight. It demonstrates that no amount of cultural sophistication or economic power can shield a society from a sufficiently powerful planetary force. Their golden age did not fade, it was shattered, leaving only whispers in myth and a stark warning from the depths of the earth. This story of geological fury sets a dramatic precedent, but our next catastrophe reveals a different kind of killer, one that crept in silently on the wind. While the fury of a volcano is terrifyingly immediate, a civilization can also be starved into oblivion by a slow, creeping change. Far from the Mediterranean, in the vast river plains of modern Pakistan and northwest India, the Indus Valley civilization built one of the most sophisticated societies of the ancient world. For centuries, their great cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, thrived. These were marvels of urban planning, laid out in precise grids with the world's first known sanitation systems. Houses were connected to covered drains, and fresh water was managed with an efficiency that would not be seen again for thousands of years. Their culture was unified, using standardized weights and measures across a territory larger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. This was a pinnacle of human organization, a testament to peace and prosperity. Then, around 1900 BCE, this meticulously ordered world began to quietly unravel. There were no invading armies left depicted on palace walls, no evidence of a great fire or a single destructive battle. Instead, the civilization simply faded away. So what silent killer could dismantle such a robust society? The answer appears to lie not in the actions of men, but in the slow death of the rivers that gave them life. Researchers like archaeologist Gregory Possehl point to a profound climate shift. The mighty river known as the Sarasvati, celebrated in ancient texts, began to fail. Its waters, fed by distant monsoons, gradually dwindled as rainfall patterns changed. Scientific analysis of sediment cores from the region tells a stark story, revealing a long-term shift towards much drier, more arid conditions. This was not a sudden drought, but a centuries-long transformation of the entire landscape. Imagine the slow, creeping dread as the annual floods grew weaker and less predictable. Canals that once brimmed with life-giving water for crops began to run dry. The agricultural surplus that supported those bustling cities, fed the artisans, and allowed for such grand planning slowly evaporated. The foundation of their entire society was quite literally drying up. People did not perish in a single cataclysm. Instead, they made a quiet, desperate choice. They began to leave. Archaeologists see this not as a violent end, but a gradual depopulation. Families and small groups likely packed their belongings and migrated eastward in search of reliable water, scattering into smaller, simpler villages. The great urban centers were not destroyed, they were simply abandoned, their brick buildings slowly reclaimed by dust and silence. The Indus Valley civilization did not fall in a day, but over generations, its people dispersed by an environmental crisis they could neither fight nor foresee. This slow-motion collapse serves as a haunting counterpoint to the explosive end of Thura. It proves that a civilization does not always need to be struck down. It can simply be starved and forgotten, its greatest achievements left as ruins in a desert that was once a breadbasket. Deep in the jungles of Central America, the silence that now surrounds the great Maya cities is a monument to a different kind of collapse. Tikal was once a thriving metropolis, its limestone pyramids piercing the canopy, its plazas filled with the sounds of commerce and ceremony. Scribes meticulously recorded the passages of time on stone stelae, tracking celestial cycles with breathtaking accuracy. This was the Maya Classic period, a 600-year golden age of art, astronomy, and royal power. Then, with startling speed, the heart of this civilization simply stopped beating. Between the years 800 and 900 CE, one city after another fell silent. Grand construction projects were abandoned mid-course, with altars left uncarved and palaces slowly emptied. The jungle did not conquer these places, it simply moved back in after everyone had left. So what could cause such a sophisticated society to unravel so completely? Archaeologist David Stewart describes it not as a single event, but as a perfect storm of crises that overwhelmed their entire system. The first blow was environmental. Analysis of ancient tree rings from the region paints a grim picture of relentless drought. For decades, the rains failed. The intricate system of reservoirs and canals that sustained millions of people began to dry up, leading to catastrophic crop failure and famine. The Maya had altered their own landscape, clearing vast tracts of forest for agriculture and to make plaster for their monuments. This deforestation may have worsened the drought, turning a climate shift into a full-blown disaster. But nature's assault was only half the story. As resources grew scarce, the social contract shattered. The Maya were not a single empire, but a network of competing city-states, often at war. Inscriptions on the last erected monuments shift from tales of gods and kings to frantic accounts of alliances broken and battles lost. The ruling class, whose power was tied to their perceived ability to communicate with the gods and bring rain, lost all credibility. When the skies remained empty, so did their authority. The people, faced with starvation and a failed leadership, likely simply walked away from the grand cities, dispersing into smaller, more sustainable communities. The Maya collapse is a profound lesson in interconnected fragility. It was not one catastrophe, but a cascade of them, environmental stress amplifying political instability, which in turn broke the economic chains that held society together. Their world did not end with a bang, but with the quiet footsteps of people leaving a broken system behind, a stark reminder that even the most advanced cultures are balanced on a knife's edge. The silence that fell over the Maya world was profound, yet it was a local tragedy. Now, picture a collapse so vast it consumed nearly every major power across the known world. Around 1200 BCE, the late Bronze Age Mediterranean was a surprisingly globalized place. The empires of the Hittites, Mycenaeans, and Egyptians were deeply interconnected through sophisticated trade routes, exchanging everything from tin for bronze to luxury goods and diplomatic letters carved on clay tablets. This was a thriving international system, a delicate web of mutual dependence. Then, in the span of just a few decades, this entire world came crashing down. Grand palaces from Greece to Anatolia were burned to the ground. Complex writing systems like Linear B were forgotten. Long-distance trade evaporated. Historians call this dramatic event the Bronze Age collapse, a systems collapse where every pillar of society fell at once. So what could possibly cause such a widespread and simultaneous failure? Scholars like Eric Klein point to a perfect storm of catastrophes. Inscriptions from the dying days speak of mysterious invaders known only as the Sea Peoples, marauding groups who attacked coastlines from Egypt to the Levant, toppling kingdoms and severing vital sea lanes. Yet they were likely not the sole cause, but a symptom of a deeper sickness. At the same time, tree ring and sediment evidence reveals a period of severe, prolonged drought that sparked widespread famine. When crops fail, people starve, and starving populations are quick to rebel against their rulers or take to the seas in desperate search of new homes. This climate shock likely set the stage for the mass migrations and internal rebellions that further shattered the fragile political order. The archaeological record tells this story in layers of ash and destruction. The great city of Ugarit, a key trade hub, was so thoroughly destroyed it was never rebuilt. In Greece, the mighty citadel of Mycenae was abandoned. The entire intricate system, reliant on centralized palace economies to store and redistribute goods, simply imploded under the combined pressure. The loss was catastrophic, plunging the region into a dark age that lasted for centuries, where literacy vanished and culture simplified. The Bronze Age collapse is a terrifying lesson in interconnectedness. It shows us that a globalized network, while a source of great wealth and stability, can also become a superhighway for disaster. A local drought or a regional conflict could ripple across the entire system, amplifying crises until they became civilization-ending events. This ancient example of a domino effect, where one fallen kingdom pulls down its neighbors, finds a chilling echo in our next story of a sudden, mysterious abandonment. A continent away and centuries later, a similar story of fragile foundations played out on the banks of the Mississippi River. Cahokia was a city of astonishing scale and ambition. At its peak around the year 1050 CE, it was the largest settlement north of Mexico, a thriving metropolis of perhaps 20,000 people. Its skyline was dominated by enormous earthen mounds, the greatest of which, Monk's Mound, still stands today, a colossal structure containing over 20 million cubic feet of soil, all moved by hand. This was a place of grand plazas, bustling markets, and sophisticated culture, a true hub of the ancient American world. Yet by the 1300s, this vibrant city was completely deserted. Its people vanished into the surrounding landscape. The silence that fell over its great plaza was absolute. What internal pressures could cause such a powerful center to simply empty out? Anthropologist Timothy Pocketat points to a familiar cascade of environmental and social breakdown. The very success of Cahokia sowed the seeds of its own demise. To build its monumental mounds and to fuel the daily lives of its massive population, the surrounding forests were cleared at an incredible rate. This deforestation, revealed in soil core samples, triggered severe erosion. Without tree roots to hold the soil, the land became unstable. Meanwhile, the intensive hunting to feed the city decimated local game, from deer to waterfowl, stripping the area of vital protein sources. The local ecosystem, pushed beyond its limits, began to fail. Then came the floods. Geological evidence shows that a period of unpredictable, severe flooding struck the Mississippi basin, likely worsened by the lack of forest cover. These floods would have devastated the agricultural fields that fed the city, leading to food shortages and famine. As resources grew scarce, the social fabric began to tear. Archaeological clues reveal a city turning inward. A massive wooden palisade, a defensive wall over 2 miles long, was erected around the central precinct. This was not a fortification against a distant enemy, but a barrier built within the community, likely to protect the elite from their own increasingly desperate and discontented populace. The grand vision of a unified city had shattered into us versus them. The people of Cahokia did not die in a single catastrophe. Instead, they made a collective choice to leave. They likely dispersed back into smaller, more sustainable villages, returning to a way of life that placed less strain on the land. Cahokia's mounds were not tombs for a dead civilization, but monuments to a failed experiment in urban living. Its story is a powerful, homegrown example of how a society can outgrow its environmental means, and how the resulting social strife can unravel even the grandest of cities from within. This contemplation of sustainable growth leads us to a culture that faced an opposite, yet equally devastating, environmental extreme. The world's first true empire was forged in the crucible of Mesopotamia. Under the legendary Sargon of Akkad, this realm achieved what no other had before, uniting a tapestry of independent city-states into a single, sprawling, multi-ethnic domain. Its administrative reach was vast, its military power seemingly absolute. Yet within just a few generations, this colossal structure crumbled to dust, its cities emptying in a wave of sudden abandonment that left archaeologists puzzled for decades. The key to unraveling this ancient mystery lay buried in the ruins of a city called Tel Leilan. There, excavators led by Harvey Weiss uncovered a stark geological line in the soil, a clear marker separating centuries of vibrant occupation from a layer of sterile, wind-blown silt. This was not the slow decay of a fading culture, it was a sudden, violent severance. The empire had hit a wall, and that wall was made of drought. Scientific analysis of soil isotopes confirmed a catastrophe of staggering proportions, a mega-drought so severe and prolonged it would have turned the Fertile Crescent into a dust bowl for generations. This was not merely a few bad harvests. It was a complete and utter failure of the agricultural system that fed the empire's armies, its bureaucrats, and its people. Cuneiform tablets from the era speak with a chilling, poetic despair, describing the dust clouds of death that choked the land. With the fields barren and the granaries empty, the social contract that bound the empire together shattered. Outlying regions, once held in check by the promise of grain and protection, saw no reason to remain loyal to a distant capital that could no longer provide for them. Rebellions flared, and the centralized power of Akkad, so formidable in times of plenty, became a hollow shell, unable to command obedience from a starving populace. The Akkadian Empire's demise is a masterclass in the vulnerability of centralized power. It proves that military might and administrative genius are no match for a fundamental shift in the climate. The very structure that allowed it to rise so high, its centralized control, became its greatest weakness when the rains failed, causing a domino effect of famine and revolt that erased the world's first empire with breathtaking speed. This ancient pattern of environmental shock unraveling a complex society finds a haunting parallel in the sudden silence that fell over a cluster of islands in the Pacific. Isolated in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Rapa Nui stands as a monument to human ambition and its perilous limits. This remote island, known to the world for its enigmatic stone moai, was once home to a sophisticated Polynesian society. These colossal statues, some weighing over 80 tons, were not merely carved, but transported for miles across the island and raised onto great stone platforms without the use of the wheel or large animals. This incredible feat speaks of a complex, organized culture with a deep spiritual life and a powerful, unified purpose. For centuries, they thrived in their secluded world. Then their civilization unraveled. The story of Rapa Nui is not one of a sudden volcanic explosion or an invading force, but a slow, grinding collapse authored by the islanders themselves. Researchers like Jared Diamond paint a compelling picture of ecological overshoot. The island was once covered in a dense forest of giant palm trees, a vital resource that the settlers gradually consumed. These trees were essential for building the large seafaring canoes needed to hunt deep-water dolphins, a primary source of protein. The wood was also used as rollers to transport the massive moai, and the roots were crucial for anchoring the island's rich soil. As the statue-building culture intensified, the forest was felled at an unsustainable rate. One by one, the last palms fell. The consequences were catastrophic. Without trees to protect it, the topsoil eroded away under heavy rains and wind, washing into the sea. Agricultural yields plummeted, leading to widespread famine. The loss of the great canoes meant the end of dolphin hunting, severing a critical food supply. The societal response to this escalating crisis is etched into the archaeological record. The grand project of erecting moai ceased abruptly. The culture's focus shifted from spiritual monument building to sheer survival. The tools of creation were repurposed for conflict. Spear points, known as matar, begin to appear in vast quantities across the island. Oral histories passed down through generations tell of brutal warfare between clans, of social chaos, and even of cannibalism born from desperation. The very society that cooperated to raise giants against the sky had fractured into warring factions fighting over the scraps of a dying world. The fate of Rapa Nui is a hauntingly clear cautionary tale. It demonstrates with stark clarity how a society, even in isolation, can actively engineer its own demise by systematically destroying the environmental resources it depends upon. Their world did not end from an outside threat, but from an internal failure to recognize the fragile balance of their ecosystem. This profound lesson in sustainability and its consequences finds a chilling parallel in our next story, where a seemingly invincible desert civilization met its end not by its own hand, but by the slow death of the very river that gave it life. The stone churches of Greenland stood empty, their silence a stark contrast to the bustling Norse settlements that once thrived there. Established around 985 CE, these communities were a remarkable feat of Viking expansion, with farms and pastures nestled in the protected fjords. For centuries, they maintained a European lifestyle at the edge of the known world, building stone manors and importing stained glass for their churches, all sustained by a precarious trade in walrus ivory and narwhal tusks. Then, by the middle of the 15th century, every last settler was gone. The end did not come from a dramatic battle or a single cataclysm, but from a slow, grinding pressure that they ultimately failed to overcome. The primary culprit was a climatic shift we now call the Little Ice Age. As temperatures steadily dropped, the growing seasons shortened, making it increasingly difficult to raise cattle and sheep, the foundation of their traditional Norse diet. Sea ice expanded, choking off the vital shipping lanes to Iceland and Norway. These were not just trade routes, they were lifelines, and when they were severed, the colonies lost access to essential supplies like iron, timber, and reinforcements. Cut off and starving, why did they not simply learn from their neighbors? The Inuit people had thrived in Greenland for generations, mastering the art of hunting ringed seals and harpooning whales from sleek kayaks. This was the ultimate test of cultural adaptability, and the Norse failed it. As researcher Thomas McGovern's work reveals, they clung stubbornly to their identity as European farmers. They viewed the Inuit way of life as inferior, refusing to adopt the sophisticated hunting techniques that could have saved them. Archaeological evidence paints a heartbreaking picture of this decline. The skeletal remains from the final years show widespread signs of malnutrition and disease. The bones of their livestock become smaller and more stunted over time, a clear indicator of chronic starvation. They were trying to subsist on a dying model, watching their world shrink season by season until there was nothing left. The demise of the Norse in Greenland is a profound lesson in the danger of cultural inflexibility. They possessed the knowledge and the means to survive, embodied by the Inuit who lived all around them, but their own world view became a prison. They could not change, and so they were erased, not in a flash, but in a long, slow fade into history. This stubborn refusal to adapt finds a powerful counterpoint in our next civilization, which faced a similar environmental crisis but responded with a radical and shocking solution. The sprawling proto-cities of the Cucuteni-Trypillia culture represent one of history's great enigmas. Flourishing across Eastern Europe for nearly 3,000 years, this society constructed some of the largest settlements on Earth, vast concentric rings of houses that could have housed tens of thousands of people. Their artisans produced stunning pottery painted with intricate spiral motifs, a testament to a complex and stable way of life. Then, around 4700 BCE, a strange and deliberate ritual unfolded across their entire world. One by one, these massive settlements were systematically set ablaze and abandoned. The archaeological record shows no signs of a frantic struggle, no evidence of a conquering army left amidst the ashes. Instead, the burning appears planned, a coordinated act carried out by the inhabitants themselves. So why would an entire culture choose to burn its own homes to the ground? Researchers like Malcolm Chapman point to two possible catalysts that may have forced this radical choice. The first is a dramatic climate shift. Pollen analysis from the region indicates a move towards a cooler, drier period, which would have placed immense strain on their agricultural system, forcing communities to disperse in search of more fertile land. The second, more ominous theory points to the arrival of new peoples from the steppes, nomadic pastoralists whose mobility and different way of life may have presented an insurmountable challenge to the settled, agricultural Cucuteni-Trypillians. Faced with such an existential threat, whether from the sky or from a human enemy, the burning may have been a final, sacred act. It could have been a ritual of purification, a way to consecrate a place before leaving it forever, or a desperate attempt to create a scorched earth barrier against advancing foes. The site of Talyanki in modern Ukraine, one of their largest centers, stands as a silent witness to this mass exodus. Its meticulously arranged houses were consumed by a great fire, after which the land was left to return to meadow. The disappearance of this culture created a power vacuum that would eventually be filled by the migrations of Indo-European speakers, reshaping the ethnic and linguistic map of Europe forever. Their story is a hauntingly different kind of collapse. It was not a defeat, but a conscious, coordinated withdrawal. It forces us to ask whether a civilization's end can sometimes be a chosen act, a final expression of community will in the face of an unstoppable change. This profound mystery of a people who vanished by their own hand finds a startling parallel in a civilization that was erased by a force of nature so immense, its true power is only now being understood. High in the thin air of the Andes, the Tiwanaku Empire was a marvel of human ingenuity. From around 500 to 1000 CE, their capital on the shores of Lake Titicaca was a spiritual and political hub, its monumental stone gateways and pyramids a testament to a culture that mastered a harsh environment. Their true genius lay in their agriculture, a system of raised fields that transformed the marshy edges of the lake into a breadbasket. These elevated planting surfaces, surrounded by canals of water, created their own microclimates, protecting crops from frost and producing astonishing yields that sustained a large urban population. This was a civilization perfectly adapted to its world. Then the world changed. A prolonged and severe drought, possibly lasting for centuries, began to choke the life from the empire. Sediment cores drilled from the lakebed, analyzed by scholars like Alan Carlotta, tell a story of rapidly falling water levels. The lake, the very heart of their world, was shrinking. As it receded, the intricate network of canals in their raised field system ran dry. The microclimates that had protected their crops collapsed, and the fertile fields that fed the cities turned to dust. The economic base of the entire empire simply vanished. What happens to a society when its foundational technology fails? The archaeological record at sites like Lukamata provides a grim answer. Once a thriving secondary center, it shows sudden evidence of violence and conflict. Defensive structures appear, and human remains bear the marks of a brutal end. This was not an invasion from the outside, but the sound of a social contract tearing itself apart from within. As famine took hold, the centralized authority that had coordinated the complex agricultural system lost its power and legitimacy. Communities that had been united under the Tiwanaku banner likely turned on each other in a desperate struggle for dwindling resources. The empire did not slowly fade, it shattered. The people dispersed, migrating to different ecological zones in the highlands and valleys, their grand identity fragmenting into smaller, isolated groups. The Tiwanaku collapse is a profound lesson in the hidden risk of specialization. Their agricultural system was a work of genius, but it was a genius tailored to a very specific set of environmental conditions. When those conditions shifted, their greatest strength became their ultimate liability. They were erased not by a lack of sophistication, but by a change in the rules of the world they had so perfectly learned to play by. This pattern of a finely tuned civilization undone by a shifting climate finds a powerful echo in the sudden abandonment of a magnificent desert city. The great citadels of Mycenae and Pylos were the nerve centers of a powerful and wealthy world. Their massive cyclopean walls, built with stones so large they seemed the work of giants, sheltered a sophisticated palace culture. Inside, scribes used the Linear B script to meticulously track the movement of goods, from chariots and bronze to vast stores of olive oil and grain. This was a centralized, bureaucratic system, a complex machine running on detailed record-keeping and controlled by a warrior elite. Then, around 1200 BCE, the machine broke down. The palaces were violently destroyed, their storerooms looted and set ablaze. The fires were so intense that they baked and preserved the very clay tablets that recorded the civilization's final, frantic transactions. In the layer of ash that marks the end, the writing stops. The knowledge of Linear B was lost for centuries, plunging Greece into an illiterate dark age. What could topple such formidable fortresses? Historian Oliver Dickinson points to a cascade of disasters that overwhelmed their entire system. Geological evidence suggests a series of powerful earthquakes may have shaken the very foundations of their power, literally cracking the walls that were meant to protect them. This physical damage coincided with a wave of external threats. Inscriptions from neighboring empires speak of the mysterious sea peoples, marauding groups who raided coastlines and severed the vital sea lanes that fed the Mycenaean economy. These were not isolated attacks, but a systemic shock to the entire Mediterranean trade network. The palace economies, so dependent on importing tin and copper to make bronze, their primary material for weapons and tools, were suddenly starved. As the central authority weakened, internal rebellions likely flared. The very people who depended on the palace for food and protection may have turned against it when that protection failed. The archaeological record shows not a clean conquest, but a messy, violent end marked by looting and destruction. The Mycenaean collapse is a stark lesson in the fragility of bureaucracy. Their complex administration, a source of great strength in times of peace, became a fatal liability when the system was stressed. Once the palaces fell, there was nothing left to hold the civilization together. The people scattered, reverting to a simpler, village-based way of life. The grand halls of the Wanaks, their kings, fell silent, their stories forgotten until their cryptic script was finally deciphered in the 20th century. This pattern of a highly structured state unraveling under pressure finds a chilling parallel in the sudden desertion of an entire city, not by force but by choice. The Khmer Empire built a masterpiece of stone and water. At its heart lay Angkor, a city of staggering scale, its skyline defined by the sublime towers of Angkor Wat. This was not just a collection of temples but a vast, engineered landscape, a hydraulic city. An intricate network of canals, reservoirs called barrays, and moats functioned like a massive circulatory system, capturing monsoon rains to sustain the population through the dry season and irrigate the rice paddies that fed an empire. This water management was their lifeblood, a triumph of human planning over nature's cycles. For centuries, it worked perfectly. Then, the system began to fail. Scientists like Brendan Buckley, analyzing ancient tree rings from the region, have uncovered a terrifying climate roller coaster. The area was struck by prolonged and severe droughts, some lasting for decades, which were abruptly punctuated by devastatingly intense monsoons. This was a catastrophic 1-2 punch for Angkor's delicate water infrastructure. During the droughts, the massive reservoirs and canals sat empty and cracked under a relentless sun. Then, when the super monsoons arrived, they unleashed torrents of water that the weakened and silted-up system could not handle. Canals burst, reservoirs were choked with sediment, and the very engineering that defined the city became its ruin. A clogged artery can cause a heart attack, and Angkor's hydraulic heart was failing. As the water system faltered, so did the power of the god-kings who ruled from Angkor. The king's divine authority was intrinsically linked to his control over water, his ability to ensure plentiful harvests. When the droughts came and the floods destroyed, that divine contract was broken. At the same time, external pressures mounted. Neighboring states like Ayutthaya began to exert power, raiding the weakened empire and challenging its dominance. The central authority, already crippled by its inability to control the environment, could not muster an effective response. The people did not leave in a single, dramatic exodus. Instead, it was a gradual migration, a slow turning away from a broken capital. The economic and spiritual center of gravity shifted south toward new capitals like Phnom Penh, which offered better access to maritime trade and, crucially, a more reliable water source from the mighty Mekong River. Angkor was not conquered so much as it was left behind, its grand stone towers slowly swallowed by the relentless jungle. Its story is a powerful testament to the fact that even the most advanced infrastructure is only as resilient as the climate it is designed for, a lesson that echoes with increasing urgency in our own time. The Western Roman Empire did not fall in a single day, but its final century was a cascade of accelerating crises. For 500 years, Rome had been the unchallenged center of the Western world, its legions enforcing a peace that stretched from Britain to the deserts of Syria. Yet by the 5th century CE, this colossal structure was buckling under its own immense weight. The empire was simultaneously bleeding gold and grappling with a paralyzing administrative rot. Constant civil wars between rival generals drained the treasury and left the frontiers dangerously thin. To fill the ranks, Rome increasingly hired barbarian mercenaries, a fateful decision that blurred the line between defender and invader. Imagine a border guard who is paid to protect the gate, yet has no true loyalty to the house he is guarding. This was the precarious reality of the late Roman army. Then came the migratory shock. Historian Peter Heather points to the sudden arrival of the Huns from the Asian steppes, a nomadic force that pushed entire populations of Goths and Vandals fleeing across the Danube River directly into Roman territory. These were not just invading armies but desperate nations on the move, and the Roman state was too weak and divided to either assimilate or repel them. The unthinkable happened in the year 410, when the Visigoths, a people once granted asylum within the empire, marched into Rome itself and sacked the Eternal City. The psychological impact of this event was far greater than the physical damage. For 800 years, the city of Rome had been considered inviolable. Its sack shattered the aura of imperial invincibility, proving that the center could no longer protect even itself. The final dissolution was not a formal surrender, but a quiet fading of authority. In 476, the Germanic general Odoacer simply deposed the last Western emperor, a boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople. There was no great battle to mark the end, just the acknowledgement that the office itself was now empty. The collapse erased the sophisticated political and economic machinery of Rome across Western Europe. The complex tax system evaporated, long-distance trade networks fractured, and the unified legal framework gave way to a patchwork of tribal codes. The lights of the ancient world did not blink out everywhere, but in the West they dimmed considerably, paving the way for the decentralized feudal kingdoms of the medieval era. The fall of Rome stands as history's ultimate lesson in how internal decay, from economic strain to political corruption, creates a vacuum that external forces will inevitably rush to fill. 13,000 years ago, North America was a land of giants. Mammoths and mastodons roamed freely, pursued by the continent's first widespread human culture, the Clovis people. Identified by their elegantly fluted spear points, these were highly adaptable big game hunters whose artifacts are found from coast to coast. Then, in what seems like a geological instant, their distinctive technology and the megafauna they hunted vanish from the record. Their disappearance is one of prehistory's most compelling cold cases. What force could erase an entire way of life so completely? The prime suspect is a dramatic and sudden climate shock known as the Younger Dryas event. Around 12,900 years ago, just as the world was emerging from the last ice age, temperatures in the northern hemisphere plummeted back to near glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. This was not a gradual cooling. Scientists like James Kennett point to geological evidence of an extraordinary cause. In a thin, dark layer of soil that marks the start of this period, researchers have found a suite of exotic materials, including microscopic nanodiamonds and tiny spheres of melted rock. These substances are typically formed under immense, instantaneous pressure and heat, the kind associated with an extraterrestrial impact. The controversial theory suggests a comet or asteroid may have exploded in the atmosphere above the North American ice sheet or fragmented into multiple impacts. The immediate effects would have been apocalyptic, with shock waves and firestorms ripping across the continent. The long-term consequences were even more devastating. The impact could have destabilized the ice sheet, pumping vast amounts of freshwater into the oceans and shutting down the currents that brought warmth to the region. The Younger Dryas winter began. For the Clovis people, this was a catastrophe on two fronts. The climate upon which their hunting strategies depended was suddenly and violently altered. At the same time, the giant mammals they relied on for food, hides, and bone could not adapt to the rapid shift and the loss of their habitats. Creatures like the mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, and the giant ground sloth were pushed over the brink into extinction. With their primary food source gone and their environment transformed, the complex social networks that distributed the distinctive Clovis spear points across the continent likely collapsed. People did not necessarily vanish entirely, but their culture did. They were forced to adapt rapidly, splintering into smaller, more isolated groups who developed new, localized tools for survival. The Clovis point was no longer relevant and its production ceased. This left a stark gap in the archaeological record, a silent testimony to a world that ended. The story of the Clovis invites us to look to the stars for answers, suggesting that our planet's history can be abruptly rewritten by forces from beyond our world. This idea of a cosmic trigger finds a startling echo in another civilization's abrupt and fiery demise, one that also points a finger at the heavens. The Moche people mastered a desert coastline, turning barren valleys into fertile fields with sophisticated irrigation canals. Their society flourished for centuries, producing breathtakingly realistic portrait vessels and constructing the immense Huaca del Sol, a pyramid of over 100 million adobe bricks. This was a culture of profound artistry and engineering, seemingly in perfect harmony with its dry world. Then the sky betrayed them. Around the 6th century CE, their world was assaulted by a climatic monster, a series of devastatingly extreme El Niño events. These were not the gentle shifts we hear of today, but violent oscillations that brought the ocean's warmth crashing into their stable climate. What happens when a civilization built for drought is drowned? Archaeologist Izumi Shimada's work reveals a horrifying sequence. First came the deluge. Torrential rains, unlike anything in living memory, fell for weeks on end. The rivers, usually tame and life-giving, swelled into raging torrents. These flash floods smashed through the intricate network of irrigation canals that were the civilization's lifeline. The adobe bricks of their monumental huacas, baked for centuries under a hot sun, began to melt like sugar cubes in the relentless downpours. The very foundations of their cities were literally washing away. But the punishment was not over. As abruptly as the rains began, they stopped. The El Niño pattern then flipped, ushering in a period of severe, prolonged drought. The fields that had just been scoured by floods now cracked under a blistering sun. The agricultural system, already reeling from the destruction of its canals, completely failed. The Moche faced a cruel paradox, drowning one season and starving the next. How does a society recover when its environment becomes its enemy? The archaeological record suggests they could not. At major centers like the Huaca del Sol, evidence points to a sudden, violent end, possibly from social unrest. A culture that had cooperated to build pyramids likely fractured under the strain of famine and displacement. The ruling priest class, who derived their power from predicting the rhythms of nature, lost all credibility when the skies behaved with such chaotic fury. The people may have turned on their leaders or simply walked away from the ruined cities. The Moche civilization did not entirely vanish, but it transformed beyond recognition. Its people dispersed and their cultural cohesion shattered. From its fragments, new powers eventually rose, like the Chimu, who learned from the Moche's plight and built their own empire on a more resilient foundation. The Moche collapse is a stark lesson in climatic whiplash, showing that a society's greatest strength, its adaptation to a specific environment, can become its gravest liability when that environment turns volatile. This story of a culture battered by the rhythms of the ocean deepens our understanding of local disasters and prepares us for a collapse driven by a far more personal and intimate failure. For 2,000 years, the Dorset people were the undisputed masters of the frozen north. Across the vast, silent expanses of the Canadian Arctic and Greenland, they built a culture of profound resilience, carving exquisite miniature art from walrus ivory and developing specialized tools to hunt seals at their breathing holes in the ice. Their world was one of extreme cold, and they were perfectly adapted to its harsh rhythms. Then, around 1500 CE, they simply vanished. Their long history ends not with a dramatic battle, but with an eerie, complete silence. The arrival of a new people, the Thule culture, the direct ancestors of the modern Inuit, signaled the end of the Dorset world. The Thule were also supremely adapted to the Arctic, but they possessed technological advantages that may have proven decisive. They had larger, more efficient skin boats for hunting great bowhead whales, and they used dog sleds for transport, giving them a much greater range. Archaeologist Robert McGee paints a picture of a slow, quiet crisis. The Dorset, while incredibly skilled, were highly specialized, their society and survival tied to a specific way of hunting and a specific climate. When the medieval warm period brought milder temperatures to the Arctic, even slight changes could have disrupted the sea ice patterns they depended on, thinning the ice platforms where they hunted. At the same time, the expanding Thule population would have been competing for the same vital resources, like seals and walrus. The Dorset, having lived in isolation for millennia, may also have had no immunity to common diseases the Thule carried with them, making even casual contact potentially devastating. The archaeological record shows no evidence of widespread violence or conquest. Instead, it suggests a gradual fading, a story written in the quiet replacement of one tool style by another at ancient sites. The Dorset did not necessarily die out in a single catastrophe, but they were likely absorbed or displaced, their unique identity dissolving in the face of a more versatile and perhaps more numerous culture. Their enigmatic soapstone carvings are all that remain, silent witnesses to a people who thrived in ice and snow for centuries, only to disappear when their isolated world was suddenly open to change. This story of a quiet erasure through contact and competition shifts our focus from grand collapses to intimate encounters. a theme that takes on a far more mysterious tone in our next story. The Hittite Empire commanded the rocky highlands of Anatolia with an iron will. From their fortified capital of Hattusa, they ruled a domain that rivaled Egypt and Babylon, their mastery of iron and heavy chariots making them a military superpower. Their legal codes were remarkably progressive for their time, and their diplomatic correspondence, preserved on thousands of clay tablets, reveals a sophisticated state deeply enmeshed in the international world of the late Bronze Age. Then, around 1200 BCE, this formidable empire shattered into pieces. Hattusa itself, a city with monumental gates and immense granaries, was not just conquered, but systematically burned and abandoned. The destruction was so complete and so final that it feels personal, as if the very memory of the Hittites was being scrubbed from the land. What could bring such a powerhouse to its knees? The answer lies not in a single enemy, but in a cascade of failures. Cuneiform tablets from the empire's final years speak with a growing desperation, detailing severe famines and pleas for grain shipments from Egypt. As historian Trevor Bryce explains, a prolonged and devastating drought had gripped the Anatolian plateau, withering the crops that fed the massive Hittite army and the populations of its cities. This environmental crisis triggered an economic collapse as trade routes faltered and the central authority lost its ability to distribute food. The empire was starving from the inside out. At this moment of profound weakness, the external pressures mounted. The same chaotic wave of migrations and raids that toppled other Bronze Age kingdoms, the mysterious sea peoples, battered the Hittite coast. Simultaneously, old rivalries flared as neighboring states like the Cahokians saw their chance to strike a weakened giant. The Hittite military, once invincible on the open plain, was stretched too thin, fighting famine at home and enemies on all fronts. The result was a systemic breakdown. The capital was torched, likely by its own inhabitants as they fled, denying it to an enemy they could no longer resist. The empire fragmented into small, isolated Neo-Hittite city-states that were soon absorbed by rising powers. A culture that had pioneered constitutional government and challenged the pharaohs was erased from the political map, its language forgotten for 3,000 years. The Hittite collapse is a masterclass in the vulnerability of interconnected systems. It proves that no amount of military might or legal sophistication can save a civilization when its environmental, economic, and military foundations give way at once. This pattern of a perfectly synchronized disaster finds a chilling parallel in the sudden silence that fell over a seemingly invincible desert civilization. While the Hittite Empire collapsed amid international chaos, a quieter dissolution was unfolding in the American South. The ceremonial center of Moundville, perched on the Black Warrior River in Alabama, was a place of profound spiritual power. At its peak around 1300 CE, it was a city of 29 massive earthen mounds arranged around a vast central plaza, a carefully ordered landscape where leaders lived atop lofty platforms closer to the sun and the spirits. This was the second largest Mississippian settlement after Cahokia, a thriving hub of artisans, farmers, and priests. Then, over the course of a century or two, the Grand Plaza fell silent. The mounds were no longer maintained, the temples emptied, and the people simply drifted away. How does a place of such clear importance simply lose its purpose? Archaeologist Vinkas Stepanaitis points to a slow, grinding environmental reality. The very success of Moundville placed an unsustainable demand on the land surrounding it. Centuries of intensive maize agriculture, focused on feeding a concentrated population, depleted the soil of its vital nutrients. Crop yields began a steady, inexorable decline. This gradual exhaustion of the earth was compounded by a changing climate. Tree ring data from the region suggests shifts in rainfall patterns, introducing periods of drought that further stressed the already weakened farmland. The land itself was growing tired, and it could no longer support the grand urban experiment. As the agricultural foundation crumbled, the social structure built upon it began to fracture. The elite, whose authority was tied to their control of food surpluses and religious ceremony, lost their leverage as harvests dwindled. Why follow a priest-king who can no longer ensure a full granary? At the same time, pressure from neighboring groups likely intensified. Conflict over the dwindling fertile land may have become more common, making the large, centralized population a vulnerable target. The archaeological record shows no evidence of a single catastrophic invasion. Instead, we see a gradual dispersal. People made a rational choice to leave, migrating out to form smaller, more sustainable farmsteads scattered across the landscape. They traded the grandeur and hierarchy of Moundville for self-sufficiency and safety. The civilization did not die, it decentralized. Its cultural practices and beliefs persisted, but the political and spiritual power that once flowed from that specific place simply evaporated. Moundville's story is a powerful lesson in the limits of local growth. It demonstrates that a society can peacefully unravel from the ground up, its people voting with their feet when the center can no longer hold. This quiet transformation through abandonment leads us to a catastrophe of a very different character, one born not from scarcity, but from a sudden and violent geological betrayal. The colossal stone heads of the Olmecs gaze out from the jungles of Mexico with an expression of timeless authority. These sculptures, some weighing over 20 tons, are the most recognizable legacy of Mesoamerica's mother culture, the civilization that laid the groundwork for all that followed, from the Maya to the Aztecs. For nearly 1,000 years, the Olmec heartland thrived, with great centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta serving as hubs of innovation where early writing, a complex calendar, and monumental art first emerged in the Americas. Then, around 400 BCE, their world fell silent. The great centers were systematically abandoned, their grand plazas and ceremonial courts left to the vines and the rain. What internal pressures could cause a society to turn its back on its own spiritual heart? The answer appears to be a devastating combination of environmental betrayal and social revolt. Archaeologist Anne Cyphers has uncovered startling evidence at San Lorenzo, where many of the iconic heads were found. These monuments, symbols of the powerful ruling class, were not simply toppled by time. They were deliberately mutilated, their faces scarred, and the sculptures then carefully buried in long, orderly lines. This was not the random violence of an invasion, but a calculated, ritualistic act of rebellion. It suggests a populace that rose up against its leaders, systematically desecrating the very symbols of their power. But what would trigger such a profound rejection of authority? The land itself provides the clue. Geological studies of the region reveal a landscape in turmoil. The rivers that were the lifeblood of Olmec agriculture, providing water and fertile silt for their crops, began to shift their courses dramatically, possibly due to tectonic activity or volcanic events. Some settlements were left stranded, their water sources now miles away. Other areas suffered from catastrophic flooding or severe soil erosion that stripped the land of its fertility. The ruling elite, who likely derived their power from a claimed ability to intercede with the gods for rain and good harvests, were exposed as powerless. When the rivers failed and the fields lay barren, the social contract was broken. The people, faced with famine and a leadership that could no longer provide, took matters into their own hands. They destroyed the stone effigies of their rulers and then made the collective decision to leave, migrating away from the dying heartland to form new communities. The Olmec civilization as a centralized power was erased, but its people and their knowledge did not vanish. Their legacy lived on, their artistic styles, their glyphs, and their astronomical knowledge scattering across Mesoamerica to become the seeds of future empires. This foundational collapse reveals a powerful truth, that a civilization can be undone not just by external forces, but by the failure of its own core bargain between the rulers and the ruled. For thousands of years, the Jomon people lived in harmony with the rich forests of ancient Japan. Their world was defined by a deep spiritual connection to nature, expressed through some of the most intricate and beautiful pottery ever crafted, coiled and rope-patterned vessels that give their culture its name. They were not nomadic wanderers but settled in villages, sustaining themselves through a sophisticated blend of hunting, fishing, and gathering, a way of life that proved remarkably stable for over 10,000 years. Then, around 300 BCE, this enduring world began to dissolve with startling speed. The agent of change arrived from the Asian mainland, carried by a wave of migration that introduced a revolutionary new technology, wet rice agriculture. This was not a minor improvement but a fundamental reinvention of how to live on the land. The Yayoi people brought with them not just rice paddies, but also metalworking, new weaving techniques, and a more hierarchical social structure. Their agricultural system could support vastly larger, more densely populated villages than the Jomon's forest-based economy ever could. Imagine the quiet, established rhythms of a Jomon village suddenly confronted by neighboring Yayoi settlements that were visibly growing, their fields producing a predictable and abundant surplus. The pressure was both demographic and economic. As scholar Junko Habu suggests, the Jomon may have already been vulnerable. A gradual cooling of the climate in the preceding centuries could have strained their traditional food sources, making their resilient but low-yield lifestyle increasingly precarious. When the Yayoi alternative arrived, it presented an undeniable, if difficult, choice. The Jomon could either adopt the new ways or be marginalized by them. There was likely no violent conquest, no single battle that ended their era. Instead, it was a slow, relentless process of assimilation. Jomon communities on the plains, where rice agriculture was most viable, would have been the first to integrate, intermarrying with the newcomers and adopting their tools and customs. Over generations, the distinct Jomon identity, their artistic traditions and their spiritual practices faded away, absorbed into the burgeoning Yayoi culture that would become the direct ancestor of modern Japan. This transition stands as a profound example of a non-catastrophic collapse. The Jomon were not erased by a volcano or a drought, but by a more efficient way of life. Their world ended not with a bang, but with a quiet cultural surrender, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force of change is not destruction, but simply a better offer. This story of peaceful erasure through migration and technology sets a haunting precedent for our next civilization, which faced a far more aggressive and mysterious invasive force. Perched high on a leveled mountaintop, the Zapotec capital of Monte Albán was a marvel of ancient engineering and political will. For more than a millennium, its grand plazas and pyramidal temples dominated the Oaxaca Valley, a testament to a civilization that had mastered its world. This was not just a city, it was a statement carved from the very rock of the mountains, a center of power that seemed unshakable. Yet by the year 800 CE, the heart of this great city had stopped beating. Its palaces were deserted, its monuments left to the elements. So how does a capital that endured for 1,000 years simply empty out? The answer lies in a slow tightening of pressures, both from within and without. Archaeologist Joyce Marcus has pieced together a story of a society turning on itself. Defensive walls were hastily erected within the city's main plaza. a clear sign that the people of Monte Alban were no longer fearing a distant enemy, but the neighbor across the street. This internal strife was likely fueled by a crisis of resources. The population had grown, and the surrounding hillsides, stripped of trees for building and firewood, began to erode, depleting the agricultural land that fed the urban center. At this moment of internal weakness, the climate delivered a devastating blow. Climatic data from the region confirms periods of intense aridity, prolonged droughts that would have pushed the already strained farming system to the brink of collapse. A hungry populace is a restless one, and the ruling class likely found their authority crumbling as they failed to provide. The final catalyst may have been the rise of neighboring powers, particularly the Mixtec groups who began to exert their own influence in the valley. Faced with internal rebellion, a broken environment, and new rivals, the people made a collective choice to leave. They did not vanish, but rather dispersed back into the surrounding villages, abandoning the grand urban experiment on the mountaintop. The collapse of Monte Alban is a profound lesson in the limits of even the most strategic location. A city built for defense could not protect itself from the slow, insidious forces of environmental decay and social fracture. Its silent ruins stand as a reminder that a civilization's greatest vulnerabilities are often the very pressures it generates from within. The Great Pyramids of Caral rose from the desert of Peru over 5,000 years ago, a testament to one of humanity's first experiments in civilization. While Egypt's pharaohs were just beginning to consolidate their power, the Caral Soup people were building a complex society of monumental architecture, sophisticated astronomy, and far-reaching trade networks. Their 6 large pyramidal structures, sunken circular courts, and residential complexes speak of a highly organized and peaceful culture. Remarkably, archaeologists like Ruth Shady Solis have found no evidence of warfare here, no fortifications, no weapons, and no mutilated bodies. This was a civilization built not on conquest, but on cooperation and commerce, exchanging fish from the coast for cotton and agricultural goods from the interior. Their survival depended on a delicate balance with their environment, a balance that was ultimately shattered. The very land that nurtured them turned treacherous. Geological evidence points to a period of intense seismic activity, a series of powerful earthquakes that would have shaken their stone structures to their foundations. At the same time, the course of the life-giving Soup River, the artery of their agriculture, began to shift, either due to tectonic uplift or climatic changes. Their irrigation canals ran dry, and the fields that fed the pyramid builders turned to dust. A society founded on peace and trade had no defensive walls, but it also had no defense against a collapsing ecosystem. Without the agricultural surplus to support their priests, artisans, and laborers, the social glue that held Caral together dissolved. The people likely dispersed in small groups, migrating to more reliable water sources and reverting to a simpler, nomadic way of life. The city was not destroyed by an enemy, but simply abandoned, its grand plazas slowly buried by the desert sands. For millennia, its existence was forgotten, its achievements erased not by human conflict, but by the indifferent forces of the planet itself. The silence that fell over Caral is a humbling reminder of how fragile our earliest beginnings truly were, a theme that echoes with chilling resonance as we approach the final catastrophes on our list. The kingdom of Kush once ruled Egypt itself, its pharaohs erecting more pyramids than their northern neighbors. From the rich Nile banks of Nubia, this powerful African civilization commanded a vast network of trade, its wealth flowing from gold, iron, and ivory. Yet by the middle of the 4th century CE, its grand capital of Meroe was a ghost city, its royal pyramids standing silent in the encroaching sand. The fall of Kush was not a single event, but a slow suffocation. For centuries, the kingdom's prosperity was fueled by a booming iron industry, a process that required immense quantities of charcoal. To feed the furnaces, the forests surrounding Meroe were steadily cleared. This deforestation, as historian Laszlo Turek explains, triggered a devastating chain reaction. Without tree roots to anchor it, the topsoil eroded, swept away by the wind or washed into the river by rare rains. The agricultural fields that fed the urban population slowly lost their fertility, and crop yields began a steady, inexorable decline. The kingdom was quite literally consuming the foundation of its own existence. At this moment of internal vulnerability, external forces converged. The rise of the Aksumite Empire in the Ethiopian highlands created a powerful new rival. Aksum controlled the Red Sea trade routes, gradually diverting the lucrative commerce that had once flowed through Kush. The economic lifeblood of the kingdom was being cut off. Then came the final military blows. Aksumite armies, emboldened and seeking to consolidate their power, launched campaigns into the heart of Kush. An inscription by the Aksumite king Azona boasts of a decisive victory, describing the destruction of towns and the capture of prisoners. Besieged by environmental decay from within and military pressure from without, the social and political structure of Kush shattered. The people of Meroe did not necessarily die in a great battle. Instead, they made a quiet, collective decision to leave. They abandoned their capital and scattered, likely migrating to more sustainable lands along the Nile or being absorbed into other cultures. The powerful civilization that had once conquered Egypt was erased, not by a sudden cataclysm, but by the relentless grind of a changing world. Its story is a profound African example of a now familiar pattern, where internal resource depletion opens the door for external forces to deliver the final, quieting blow. This intersection of human activity and shifting power prepares us for a final, hauntingly different kind of erasure, one that unfolded not on a grand imperial scale, but within the intimate confines of a single, isolated community. High on the sun-baked cliffs of Mesa Verde, a civilization carved its home from the stone itself. The ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi, constructed entire cities in the alcoves of canyon walls, multi-story dwellings of stone and mortar that seemed to grow organically from the rock. Their kivas, circular underground chambers, were centers of spiritual and community life, anchoring a society that thrived for centuries across the arid southwest. They were master dry-land farmers, coaxing maize, beans, and squash from the dusty soil with ingenious water conservation techniques. Then, in the 13th century, the world they had so carefully built began to empty out. The great cliff houses fell silent, their hearths growing cold, their storerooms left full of pottery and tools. This was not a sudden, violent end, but a deliberate, collective departure. What could drive a people to walk away from such monumental achievements? The answer is written in the rings of ancient trees. Dendrochronologists like Jeffrey Dean have decoded these wooden archives, revealing a climatic catastrophe of staggering duration. A mega-drought stretching for decades gripped the region. The already scarce rains failed almost completely, and the delicate balance of their agricultural system shattered. The reservoirs and cisterns they built to capture every precious drop of water sat empty. The corn stalks withered in the fields, and the threat of famine became a constant, grinding reality. A society can endure many hardships, but without water, its foundation turns to dust. Yet the environmental crisis alone does not tell the whole story. As resources dwindled, the social fabric likely began to fray. The very architecture of their final settlements hints at a world turning inward and fearful. Many cliff dwellings are virtually inaccessible, reachable only by climbing sheer rock faces with handholds carved into the stone. This was a defensive posture, suggesting that conflict may have escalated between communities competing for the last reliable springs and fertile plots. The stress of survival can turn neighbor against neighbor, and the great cooperation that built the pueblos may have fractured under the relentless pressure of drought. Faced with a broken environment and rising social tensions, the ancestral Puebloans made a profound choice. They did not perish in place. Instead, they migrated. In a great, organized exodus, they dispersed from their monumental centers, traveling south and east to where water was still known to flow. They carried their knowledge and their culture with them, eventually establishing new pueblos along the Rio Grande and other waterways where their descendants live to this day. The vanishing of the Anasazi is not a story of extinction, but of transformation driven by necessity. It shows us that the end of a place is not always the end of a people. Sometimes the most resilient act a civilization can perform is to recognize a failing world and have the courage to leave it behind, seeking not to conquer nature, but to find a new harmony with it. This powerful legacy of mobility in the face of a changing Earth leads us to our final, and perhaps most revealing, ancient catastrophe. The final silence fell not in a grand city or a fertile river valley, but on a cluster of volcanic islands adrift in the Atlantic. The Guanche people of the Canary Islands had built a society in perfect isolation, evolving for over 1,000 years with a culture and language entirely their own. They mummified their dead, lived in caves and stone dwellings, and governed themselves through a patchwork of small kingdoms across the different islands. Their world was complete, a self-contained experiment in human development. Then, in the 15th century, Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, and their civilization was erased within a handful of generations. This was not a collapse from within, but a violent and total shattering from the outside. The Spanish conquest was swift and brutal, but the true weapons of destruction were invisible. The Guanches had no immunity to common European diseases like smallpox and influenza. These illnesses swept through the islands like a silent wildfire, devastating communities that had never encountered such pathogens. Historians like John Mercer note that this biological shock alone would have been catastrophic, but it was compounded by deliberate human actions. The invaders systematically enslaved the population, forcing them into labor on sugar plantations and shipping many off the islands entirely. This forced removal shattered families and social structures, making it impossible for the culture to sustain itself. Their fragmented political landscape, with each island ruled by its own leader, meant they could not mount a unified resistance against the organized Spanish forces. One by one, the kingdoms fell. The final blow was cultural assimilation. The Guanche language was suppressed, their religious practices were outlawed, and their children were raised within a new Spanish Catholic identity. Within a few short generations, their unique way of life was extinguished, their voice in the world permanently silenced. The story of the Guanche is a stark and sobering archetype of colonial collapse, a reminder that a civilization can be ended not by a volcano or a drought, but by the simple, devastating arrival of a more powerful and technologically advanced world. Their erasure forces us to look back across all 25 of these ancient catastrophes, from the geological fury that buried Thura to the colonial violence that silenced the Guanche. A single, haunting pattern emerges. Civilizations are not immortal. They are fragile constructs vulnerable to the planet's raw power, to the slow decay of their environment, to the internal fractures of social strife, and to the external shock of an unstoppable new force. Each collapse in its own way serves as a mirror, reflecting the delicate and interconnected threads of ecology, technology, and community that hold our own world together today. Across these 25 stories of vanished worlds, a chilling pattern begins to crystallize. The collapse of a civilization is rarely a simple story with a single villain. Instead, it is a perfect storm, a deadly convergence of environmental shock, internal social fracture, and external pressure. The mighty Hittites were not felled by the sea peoples alone, but by a drought that hollowed them out from within. The Maya did not merely suffer a bad drought, but a political collapse that shattered their ability to respond. Time and again, we see that when these three vulnerabilities align, even the most powerful societies can unravel with breathtaking speed. This points to a deeper, more unsettling truth about the nature of civilization itself. Scholar Joseph Tainter presents a compelling argument that complexity can be a civilization's ultimate trap. Early societies grow more complex to solve problems, building bureaucracies, armies, and grand infrastructure. This system works beautifully until it doesn't. A highly complex society requires immense energy to maintain its own intricate structure. When a major crisis hits, whether a drought or an invader, that rigid system may be too brittle, too specialized, and too expensive to adapt quickly. It cannot downsize or pivot. Think of the late Bronze Age empires, their economies so perfectly tuned to a specific trade network that when it frayed, the entire structure imploded. Their complexity, once the source of their power, became a fatal liability. So what separates the societies that shattered from those that found a way to endure? The answer appears to lie in resilience, a quality built on flexibility, diversification, and sustainable resource use. The people of Cahokia and the ancestral Pueblones ultimately made the resilient choice. They decentralized and moved, trading monumental cities for survival. The Norse of Greenland, in contrast, clung to an unsustainable identity and paid the ultimate price. These ancient stories are not just dusty history, they are a mirror. In our modern world of interconnected economies and accelerating climate change, we face eerily similar pressures. Our globalized networks are a wonder, but like the Bronze Age trade routes, they can also amplify a local crisis into a global one. Our intensive use of resources echoes the deforestation of Rapa Nui or the Cushite iron industry. The lesson is not that collapse is inevitable, but that our fate hinges on learning the patterns of the past, on building systems that are agile, diverse, and in balance with the planet. Understanding why these civilizations fell is the first step toward ensuring our own story has a different ending. 25 ancient worlds have vanished before our eyes, each collapse a stark lesson in the fragility of human achievement. From the volcanic fire that silenced Thura to the colonial diseases that erased the Guanche, these stories reveal a universal truth. No civilization, no matter how magnificent or powerful, is immune to the converging pressures of a changing climate, internal social strife, and external shock. Their ruins stand as silent sentinels, reminding us that our own complex societies are balanced on a knife's edge, dependent on a delicate web of ecological and social agreements. The historian Will Durant captured this perfectly when he observed that civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice. These ancient echoes are not meant to inspire fear, but to provoke wisdom. They urge us to look at our own interconnected world, our own strained resources, and our own social contracts with clear eyes. Let these tales be a call to build with resilience, to value adaptability, and to remember that the threads of our society, while strong, are not unbreakable. If this journey through the echoes of fallen empires has given you a new perspective, we invite you to subscribe for more explorations into the deep past. Share your thoughts below on which of these 25 catastrophes resonated most deeply with you. The past may be gone, but its urgent lessons are waiting for us to